On July 26, 2026, 29-year-old Tasia Fortune was last seen by her family at a reunion in Kentucky. To her mother, something about Tasia seemed different that day, but in a good way. She appeared happy, peaceful, and in a better place than she had been before. Tasia was a mother of 4, and according to her family, her children were at the center of her life. But just 8 days later, on August 3rd, Tasia's body was discovered hanging from a tree behind a vacant house in Jackson. Investigators believe she may have been there for several days, but the circumstances surrounding what happened remain unclear. The question isn't simply how Tasia died, it's what happened during the days between the last time her family saw her and the moment she was found. And before we can understand how Tasia Fortune died, we have to understand what happened to her in the days before she was found. Tasia Fortune was known first and foremost as a mother building her life around 4 children. At 29, Tasia had made her kids the priority behind nearly every decision she made. Their names and exact ages have remained private, but relatives consistently describe them as the driving force in her life. People around Tasia remembered a woman with an unmistakable personality. She was outgoing, humorous, loyal, determined, and confident, with a strong interest in hair and makeup. Family and friends also described her as someone who worked hard, helped others, and cared deeply about the people closest to her. Her mother, siblings, grandmother, children, and extended relatives formed a close family network that remained central to her identity. Her connection to Kentucky developed later in life. Tasia had been born and raised in Jackson, Mississippi, but eventually relocated to Kentucky, where she had family ties, particularly around Lexington. According to statements from relatives, she had lived there for roughly 1 to 2 years. The move carried a clear purpose, staying closer to her mother and extended family, while creating what she hoped would be a safer, more stable future for herself and her children. Even after leaving Mississippi, those connections remained intact. Friends and relatives there continued to know her as warm, dependable, family-focused, and hard-working, and her Southern upbringing remained part of the person they remembered. Kentucky represented a new chapter, but Mississippi still held an important place in her story. Her relationship with her mother was especially significant. Her mother spoke of Tasia as her best friend, referring to her with expressions such as, "my heart" and "my ride or die." To the people who loved her, Tasia was never defined by a headline or an investigation. She was a daughter, a sister, a mother, and a friend whose children meant everything to her. Then that ordinary family story took a turn none of them had anticipated. That turn did not happen in a dramatic moment. It began quietly, at a family reunion. The final known meeting between Tasia Fortune and her family happened at a reunion in Lexington, Kentucky, on Saturday, July 26, 2026. Douglas Park provided the setting as relatives gathered for food, conversation, photographs, and time together. Nothing about that afternoon suggested that the family was witnessing their last gathering with Tasia. Christy Spivey, Tasia's mother, was there and later recalled seeing her daughter moving comfortably among the relatives. Tasia spent time eating, dancing, taking pictures, and keeping an eye on her children while reconnecting with people she had not seen recently. She appeared well put together, with her hair styled and her outfit carefully chosen, and family members remembered the broad smile she carried throughout the day. More importantly, those around her did not notice anything that would have suggested immediate concern. Tasia did not tell relatives that someone had threatened her, nor did she appear frightened or distressed during the reunion. Instead, the people around her saw the same outgoing woman they knew, enjoying an ordinary family afternoon with her children and the people closest to her. For Christy, however, one part of that day would later carry a significance she could never have anticipated. She and Tasia spoke, embraced, and exchanged "I love you" before going their separate ways. When ABC News later asked Christy about her daughter's emotional state during that final encounter, she described Tasia as better than I had seen her in a long time, and said she was at peace.
Tasia loved living life. Like, there's no way that she took her own life.
The reunion eventually ended like countless family gatherings before it. There was no confrontation to remember, no alarming exchange, and no behavior that made anyone stop and ask whether Tasia was safe. Christy simply expected another opportunity to see her daughter, perhaps the following day or within the next few days. Instead, that ordinary goodbye became the last moment she would share with Tasia, and what followed left the family facing 8 days that remained unexplained. For investigators, the most important detail was not what they knew, but what they could not establish. After the Kentucky family gathering on July 26th, the publicly available record provides no detailed account of Tasia Fortune's movements through August 2nd. There are no publicly confirmed sightings, verified messages, released phone records, or surveillance footage that fill that gap. That does not officially label those 8 days as a disappearance. It simply leaves a missing portion of the timeline between the family's last reported sighting and the next confirmed event. That next point came on August 3, 2026, in Jackson, Mississippi. Police received a call concerning a disturbing discovery along Road of Remembrance, in the 500 block. Behind a vacant residence, officers located the body of a woman suspended from a tree. At first, investigators had no name to attach to her, and authorities identified her only as an unidentified black female. The property offered little comfort or visibility. The residence stood vacant, while vegetation had grown across portions of the surrounding yard, leaving the area relatively secluded from the roadway. Once officers arrived, the location became an active investigation site, with police restricting access and crime scene personnel documenting the area around the tree and the body. The coroner's office was also contacted as investigators began working to establish what had happened and, most importantly at that stage, who the woman was. Officers reached the location shortly after 9 p.m. Based on the preliminary assessment at the scene, investigators believed the woman may have remained there for approximately 3 or 4 days. Firefighters brought a ladder truck to assist with removing her from the tree, while the absence of identification meant officers could not immediately provide a name. The answer eventually came through the coroner's office. The woman discovered behind the vacant property was identified as 29-year-old Tasia Fortune. That identification connected 2 locations separated by hundreds of miles and joined the quiet period after July 26 with the discovery in Jackson. But identifying Tasia only established who had been found. It did not explain why she was there. Investigators still faced fundamental questions about how she reached Road of Remembrance, whether she died at that location or arrived there afterward, and who may have been responsible for leaving her behind the vacant house. At that point, the exact cause and manner of death had not been publicly determined, and the circumstances remained under investigation. For her family, the discovery transformed an unexplained absence into something far more painful. Tasia had been a mother, daughter, sister, and friend, yet investigators had located her away from the people who knew her and in a secluded property where nobody expected to find her. The identification closed one part of the case. The circumstances surrounding her final days were still waiting for an answer. Once the coroner's office confirmed the identity, the focus shifted. The question was no longer who is she, but how did she get here? The location immediately became one of the central pieces of the investigation because there was no publicly reported connection between Tasia and that property. Nothing in the available information establishes that she lived there, worked nearby, or regularly visited the area. For her relatives, the location was difficult to understand. Tasia had been living in Kentucky, yet authorities found her in Jackson, Mississippi, behind an empty house on a residential street. That raises several possibilities, but none should be treated as established fact. She could have gone there herself, someone could have brought her there, or the property could have been selected because it offered privacy. Investigators would need evidence to determine whether Tasia knew the location or whether someone else chose it for her. The condition of the property added another layer to that uncertainty. With no resident occupying the house, there would have been fewer people routinely watching the surrounding grounds, while vegetation around the property could make activity harder to notice from the street. Those conditions may also complicate an examination of the area, because outdoor evidence can change with weather, foot traffic, and the passage of time. Whether anyone deliberately selected the property for those characteristics remains unknown. Tasia was located near a tree behind the residence. rather than in an exposed part of the property. From the roadway, that placement would not necessarily have made her immediately visible, although the available facts do not establish exactly how long she remained unnoticed or why she was positioned there. That distinction matters because investigators must separate what the scene demonstrates from what it merely suggests. The surroundings can raise questions, but they cannot independently establish who brought Tasia there or what happened beforehand. The estimated time involved made the timeline even harder to reconstruct. Initial information indicated that Tasia may have been at the location for approximately 3 to 4 days before officers discovered her, although authorities had not publicly established an exact date or time of death. That leaves several possibilities within the known timeline. She could have died closer to July 26, or her death could have occurred later. It also remained unresolved whether Road of Remembrance was where the fatal event occurred or whether her body arrived there afterward. For investigators, those distinctions were crucial. The property could potentially reveal traces of movement, transportation, or contact, but the passage of several days could affect what remained available to examine. Determining the cause and manner of death would be essential to understanding whether investigators were dealing with a homicide, suicide, or another circumstance altogether. Until that determination was made, the scene could provide clues, but not the answer. That distinction mattered because investigators had not yet received the medical findings needed to explain how Tasia died. Until those results were available, authorities could not responsibly tell the public exactly what had happened. Suicide remained another possibility that had not been publicly confirmed or eliminated at that stage. Police had not announced that Tasia had taken her own life, and there was no publicly mentioned suicide note, known history of suicidal behavior, or reported statement from relatives saying she had expressed an intention to harm herself. Her family, however, rejected that possibility. For them, the uncertainty created by the official silence was difficult to reconcile with the woman they knew.
Tasia loved living life. Like, no one's trying blaming Ted or anything like that, you know. We just want answers.
She was a good mom, you know.
Christy Spivey and other relatives repeatedly pointed to the life Tasia had been living before her death. She was raising 4 children and remained focused on their future, while family members remembered her appearing happy and engaged during the July 26 reunion. They had watched her eat, dance, laugh, and spend time with her children that day, without seeing behavior they interpreted as a warning that she intended to die. From their perspective, the idea that Tasia had deliberately ended her own life did not fit what they knew about her circumstances or state of mind. That left the medical examiner with a critical role. An autopsy could help establish the cause of death and contribute to determining its manner, while additional examination could identify injuries, defensive wounds, signs of a struggle, substances in the body, or other findings that might clarify the circumstances. For Tasia's family, though, every unanswered question carried a personal cost. Christy Spivey and other relatives continued speaking publicly, appearing at vigils, and asking anyone with information to contact authorities. Their position remained consistent. They wanted an explanation for what happened to Tasia and accountability if another person had caused her death.
We're going to press this as far as we can press it until she gets justice.
Most importantly, they wanted her children to know the truth about what happened to their mother. Investigators had not publicly identified who might be responsible, whether an arrest would follow, or whether the vacant property represented the location where Tasia actually died. It was also unknown whether she knew the person responsible, whether that person was someone from her existing circle, whether the event had been planned or happened spontaneously, and whether witnesses or other evidence could establish what occurred. The case therefore remained suspended between what investigators knew and what they could prove publicly. Tasia had disappeared from the known timeline after July 26, and 8 days later, authorities found her in Jackson. The medical findings could answer questions about her death, but they could not automatically explain everything that happened beforehand. As detectives continued examining the people, places, communications, and movements connected to Tasia, another part of the investigation began to draw attention, and that trail led investigators towards someone who knew her. That trail soon produced a name, Terrence Anderson. His connection to the case drew attention partly because he lived in the same area of Jackson where Tasia Fortune was discovered. Reports placed his residence on Road of Remembrance, the same road where authorities located Tasia behind a vacant property. Living nearby did not establish wrongdoing, but it gave investigators a reason to speak with him as they worked to understand Tasia's final days. The interview reportedly revealed a disagreement over Anderson's relationship with Tasia. Investigators said the two had been romantically involved, according to reporting about what police presented in court, while Anderson rejected that characterization. He maintained that they were not in a relationship. At the same time, Anderson acknowledged that he and Tasia had argued. Public reporting did not establish what caused that dispute, precisely when it occurred, or whether anyone else witnessed it, leaving the significance of the argument uncertain. Anderson also denied having any role in Tasia's death. That distinction is important because authorities did not publicly announce him as a suspect in her killing, and he was not charged with causing her death. What had emerged publicly was narrower. Detectives had questioned him, reports connected him to Tasia, he acknowledged an argument between them, and he disputed the claim that they had been in a relationship. None of those facts, by themselves, established responsibility for what happened to Tasia. Then, on August 4th, another development put Anderson back in the headlines. He was arrested one day after authorities discovered Tasia's body, a coincidence in timing that could easily lead observers to assume the arrest involved her death. It did not. Anderson faced a charge of possession of a weapon by a convicted felon, which was a separate criminal matter. That weapons charge carried no public allegation that Anderson had killed Tasia or that the weapon involved had any connection to her death.
Records show Terrence Anderson, who's behind bars on an unrelated weapons charge, lives on the same street block where Fortune's body was found.
With Anderson's arrest unable to answer the central question, attention naturally returned to Tasia's family. Her mother, Christy Spivey, repeatedly rejected the possibility that her daughter had deliberately caused her own death. She stated she did not do this to herself, and added, "I know my daughter." Those statements reflected Christy's personal understanding of Tasia, rather than an official medical or investigative determination. Christy based that belief partly on their final meeting at the July 26 family reunion. She had described Tasia as being in a better emotional place than she had seen in a long time, and said her daughter appeared at peace. Tasia's father, Antonio Fortune, likewise described her as someone who loved her children, her family, and life itself. From their perspective, the woman they knew did not appear to be preparing to leave her children or family behind. But what a family believes and what investigators can establish are two different things. Their statements could explain why they rejected suicide, but they could not determine the official cause or manner of death. That determination had to come from evidence, forensic findings, and the investigation itself. Until authorities established what happened, the family could only keep asking questions and pressing for the truth. And beyond the people already connected to the investigation, another issue was beginning to shape the way Tasia's case was being understood: the history of the place where she was found. The circumstances surrounding Tasia Fortune's death immediately carried a weight that went beyond the individual case. Tasia was a 29-year-old black woman, and authorities found her hanging from a tree behind a vacant house in Jackson, Mississippi. That image inevitably recalled Mississippi's history of racial terror, particularly the lynchings carried out against black Americans during the Jim Crow era. None of that establishes that Tasia was lynched. There is no public evidence currently proving that. But it helps explain why the discovery triggered such strong concern, calls for transparency, and questions about how thoroughly the circumstances would be examined.
It was heartbreaking. One, because they said she was found in a backyard, not alive.
We don't normally have that, so just to hear that happen, it kind of got us shook, basically the whole neighborhood shook, because we never have that problem. But just to hear about that, like I say, it got everybody skeptical, everybody questioning each other, don't nobody know what's what.
That reaction also developed within a broader atmosphere surrounding several recent hanging deaths in Mississippi. Trey Reed, a 21-year-old black student at Delta State University in Cleveland, died less than a year earlier, and authorities ultimately ruled his death a suicide. The autopsy supported the preliminary findings and did not reveal evidence of foul play. His family nevertheless raised concerns about aspects of the investigation and sought an independent autopsy and security footage. Corey Zukatis, an unhoused white man in his 30s in Vicksburg, also died in a case ruled a suicide by the Mississippi State Medical Examiner. None of these deaths have been publicly linked to Tasia's case, but they formed part of the wider public conversation surrounding unexplained deaths in the state. That conversation reached the political level as well. Jackson City Councilman Kenneth Stokes wrote to Mississippi U.S. Attorney Baxter Kruger requesting federal assistance and referred to Tasia as a murder victim. That description reflects Stokes' position, not an official determination by investigators. Tasia's mother, Christy Spivey, also made her position clear. She did not want her daughter's death associated with racial hatred and said she did not believe race motivated what happened. For her, Tasia's name should be remembered through love and joy. Strip away the history, public reaction, and speculation. Investigators sent Tasia's remains to the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's office for examination, with the cause and manner of death among the questions requiring determination. The latest reporting reflected in this case does not provide a publicly finalized cause or manner of death. Tasia's complete movements after July 26 have not been publicly established, and the reason she was at that vacant property remains unknown. Authorities have not publicly identified the last person confirmed to have seen her alive, nor have they publicly named a suspect in connection with her death. The broader question is harder, but it is the one the evidence allows us to ask. What happened to Tasia Fortune? What happened between July 26 and August 3? Where was she during those missing days? Who was with her? Why did she end up behind that vacant house? And what will the medical examiner ultimately determine? August 4th brought an arrest, but that arrest concerned an unrelated weapons offense. The death investigation remains active, while the public still awaits a final determination of the cause and manner of death. Calling the case simply unsolved can suggest that authorities have already classified it as a homicide, when the publicly available record does not establish that. But a case file cannot capture everything about the person at its center. Tasia was 29 years old, a mother of 4, and someone her family remembered as loving and devoted to her children. Her mother has said she did not do this to herself, while acknowledging through her continued search for answers that belief alone cannot establish what happened. The investigation must do that. For now, the timeline ends with 2 fixed points: July 26, when Tasia was last reported seen by her mother, and August 3rd, when authorities found her in Jackson. Between those dates lies a stretch of time the public still cannot fully account for. Somewhere inside that gap are the circumstances that led to Tasia's death. And until those circumstances are established, the most honest ending is also the simplest. Tasia Fortune's family still does not have the answer.